Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 5, Hiuen Tsiang, historian of early Buddhism, from the Adepts in the Eastern Esoteric Tradition by Manly Palmer Hall, Part 2, the Arhats of Buddhism. Hiuen Tsiang, historian of early Buddhism, the delightful old Chinese intellectual, antiquarian, philosopher, and adept in magical arts, Hiuen Tsiang was born in the Keu-shi district of China, about AD 605. The father of this distinguished traveler was renowned for his superior abilities, the elegance of his manner, and the moderation of his deportment. He wore his dress long and large and his girdle full, and loved to be recognized as a scholar. He declined all public office and worldly honors and lived in retirement, much to the admiration of his better informed acquaintances. At the time of the birth of Hiuen Tsiang, his mother had a dream that she saw him journeying toward the west, clothed in white robes. In her dream, she said, "You are my son. Where are you going?" The young man replied, "I am going to seek for the doctrine." This seemed to be an omen, or an indication that Hiuen Tsiang was destined to travel to far places. Hiuen Tsiang was one of 4 sons, an early indicated promise of superior mental acquirements. He began the reading of the sacred books and the classics at his 8th year and declined to mingle in the activities of other children. While he was still a child, there was a royal mandate for the election of 14 priests who were to be supported in their studies and holy life without a charge to themselves. Several hundred applicants competed for these positions. Hiuen Tsiang was too young to be a candidate, but he placed himself at the gate of the building where the applicants were to be examined. As he expected, he was able to attract the attention of the High Commissioner. This officer, impressed by the youth's sincerity and the evidence of the superiority of his mind, brought the boy before the other officials recommending his election. Naturally, the High Commissioner's suggestion was accepted, and Hiuen Tsiang had no further worldly responsibilities. As the life and history of this distinguished Buddhist recluse were written entirely by himself, and he had an admirable estimation of his own abilities, the account of his accomplishments as a young man may be considered flattering. He preferred to refer to himself as the Master of the Law, and this is the title by which he came to be generally known. He was ordained at the end of his 20th year, and in order to advance his spiritual career, he retired to an unfrequented place, devoting himself to study. He had already experienced consciousness in the 8 expanses and was deeply versed in the secrets of nature. He was visited by many celebrities, including the king of the region, and gained wide renown for his skill in discourse and his ability to interpret the deeper parts of the scriptures. When the Master of the Law was about 24 years old, he was favored by a wonderful sleep vision. He dreamt that he saw in the midst of a great sea Mount Meru, perfected with 4 precious substances. He thought that he attempted to scale the mountain, but the sea became very rough, and there were no boats by which he could cross the water. With firm resolution, he saw himself walk out upon the waves, and at that moment a lotus of stone rose from the deep. He tried to stand upon it, but it vanished again. In the same moment he found himself at the foot of the mountain. He could not climb its sharp sides, but in his desire he tried to jump, and as he leapt into the air, a whirlwind carried him to the summit of Meru. As he reached the top, he awakened and considered that he had been given the promise of extraordinary accomplishment. Soon after his prophetic dream, the Master of the Law undertook the perilous journey that was to bring him undying fame. Resolved to reach India in quest of knowledge, he plunged alone into the vast desert of Gobi. Naturally, he had numerous adventures, and the stories of his travels rivals the Arabian Nights' entertainment. In addition to the natural difficulties of so vast an undertaking, the wanderer was frequently confronted with splendid and extraordinary supernatural occurrences. In each incident, he emerged victorious and continued resolutely toward the accomplishment of his principal project. After going southeast and crossing the great snowy mountains, the Master of the Law arrived at the borders of Kapisa. It was while in this region that he visited the Cave of the Shadow. This cavern lay to the eastward of a stony watercourse, and the entrance faced the west, The traveler was guided by an old man who knew the place, but upon reaching the cave, the pilgrims were stopped by 5 robbers. These, touched by the sincerity of the monk, permitted him to continue unmolested. Following the instruction of his ancient guide, the master of the law entered the cave and walked straight to the eastern wall. Then he stepped backward 50 paces and faced the east. Standing thus, he performed most sincere worship and recited the gathas of the Buddha, prostrating himself after each verse of praise. After he had performed about 300 acts of worship with the full devotion of his heart, the whole cave was brightened up with light. The shadow of Tathagata of a shining white color appeared on the wall, as when the opening clouds suddenly reveal the Golden Mount and its excellent indications. Bright were the divine lineaments of his face, and as the master gazed in awe and holy reverence, he knew not how to compare the spectacle. The body of Buddha and his Keu-shi robe were of a yellowish-red color, and from his knees upward, the distinguishing marks of his person were exceedingly glorious. But below, the lotus throne on which he sat was slightly obscured. On the left and right of the shadow, and somewhere behind, were visible the shadows of bodhisattvas and the holy priests surrounding them. Thus the appearance lasted for the short space of half a mealtime, during which, having uttered his praises in worship and scattered flowers and incense, the light then suddenly disappeared. The master of the law reached Kapilavastu, where he saw the old foundations of the palace of Queen Maya, where Buddha was born. Near this was a stupa, tower, marking the place where the Rishi Asita took the horoscope of the great incarnation. Here also were many monuments built by King Asoka, honoring the great events. Towers were erected where Buddha, sitting up in his golden coffin, preached on behalf of his mother, and stretching out his arm, questioned Ananda and showed his feet to Kasyapa. Also where they burned his body with scented wood, and the 8 kings divided his bone relics. There were also monuments at places associated with previous incarnations of the Buddha. The master of the law visited many places where the celebrated Arhats of the doctrine had lived or preached. To the westward of the kingdom of Usha, on top of a high peak, was a remarkable stupa. This commemorated the discovery, after a great storm which had shattered the mountain, of the body of a meditating sage who sat with closed eyes and covered with matted hair. This was an Arhat who had entered the most profound meditation long before. After carefully anointing the body, according to the instruction of those informed in such matters, the Arhat was aroused. He then asked, "Has Sakyamuni accomplished the unequaled condition of perfect enlightenment?" When told that Buddha, having procured benefit for all mankind, had passed into the nirvana, the adept returned to meditation, and after a time he ascended into the air and consumed his own body with fire. The master of the law kept a faithful, if somewhat colorful, account of persons met and things seen. He gave special consideration to the myths and legends which always spring up around sanctified places. Scholars are especially indebted to Hiuen Tsiang for his extensive account of the great Buddhist university at Nalanda. He remained for 2 years in this college of the Adepts. He mastered Sanskrit and made a profound study of the various systems of Buddhist philosophy. He preserved the only eyewitness account of many strange and wonderful shrines and temples which have since crumbled into ruin or vanished utterly. The grand tour of the master of the law required 15 years, and he lived to return to China, bringing with him a large collection of books, many precious images, and a quantity of relics. His accomplishments attracted imperial attention, and at the request of the emperor, he extended and organized his notes and compiled the narration of his experiences. The writing of his book required 3 years, and during the same period, he continued his activities as a teacher and philosopher. When the text of the work was entirely finished, he elaborated it with many pictures. It would not seem that Hiuen Tsiang was devastated by false modesty. He considered himself as entirely worthy of any approbation which came his way. Shortly before his death, he ordered his disciples to read aloud for his benefit the exhaustive list of their master's virtues, attainments, abilities, and honors. When the reading was complete, the old scholar applauded his own accomplishments vigorously and resigned himself to death with an expression of smug and intense satisfaction. When the time of his transition came, he closed his eyes and, having repeated certain verses in adoration of the Maitreya, remained perfectly still for several days, departing from this mortal sphere on the 13th day of the 10th month of the year, AD 664. In spite of the glories of Nalanda and the impressiveness of its cultural concepts, Buddhism in India showed signs of decline even in the days of Hiuen Tsiang and Hiuen Tsiang. They left several descriptions of ruined shrines and deserted monasteries. Most of the native princes and rulers were addicted to Hinduism and did little to advance the rival doctrine. The Muslims began to invade and to occupy India about the year AD 1000. They destroyed most of the surviving Buddhist monuments and schools, and by the end of the 12th century, Magadha fell into their hands. Rather than accept the limitations imposed by the Islamic faith, the Buddhist monks and teachers chose exile. They passed to other regions where the Muslims could not or did not choose to follow. Here, the teachings of Buddha found ready acceptance, and the influence of this noble religious philosophy was both lasting and useful. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.